But first to Victoria, where there are today 394 new cases of COVID-19, 7,854 active cases in the state. Overnight, 17 people have died from the coronavirus, 2 men in their 50s, 4 men in their 70s, 6 people in their 80s and 5 in their 90s, each one someone's mother or father, grandparent, brother or sister. 634 people with COVID-19 are currently in Victorian hospitals and 43 are in intensive care. It's now been a week since Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews announced the Stage 4 lockdown with a strict 8 p.m. curfew. But he hasn't yet apologised for the fact that Victorians are in this situation. He's still refusing to say who is ultimately responsible for the hotel quarantine scandal or provide any details about what went on behind the scenes. And journalists who are trying to hold him to account are subject to attacks. Here's Daniel Andrews evading answering questions just this week.
It's incredible, Premier, that during the early debate about this, in Cabinet and beyond, that no one raised the prospect of police, ADF or the Department of Corrections taking control of it or giving it appropriate oversight. It just seems incredible that wasn't even suggested.
Well, the oversight arrangements, their adequacy or otherwise, are matters that Judge Coate will go to directly.
Weren't these decisions made by the CCC, and you're part of that? Exactly
Who delivered these services and in what circumstance, those matters need to be dealt with by Judge Coate.
But the police minister is part of that special cabinet. Well, she didn't raise, why don't we use the police?
I'm not conducting this inquiry. I am not conducting this inquiry. Judge Coate is. And nor am I going to simply... Hang on a minute. I am not going to seek to provide you answers to questions that I simply don't have.
We now know the reason behind the decision to use cheaper private contractors at hotel quarantine rather than ADF and police, a social inclusion policy that saw the government hire a security firm rather than use the ADF personnel that was offered to them repeatedly. But Victorians now forced into severe lockdowns and some facing the prospect of losing family members have been given no explanation and no apology. There's been a suggestion that the Morrison government has been walking away from holding the Victorian Andrews government to account, but here was Health Minister Greg Hunt on my show a few weeks ago explaining the 3 reasons why he said the Victorian government was responsible for the outbreak as the second wave started. He said, firstly, the hotel quarantine debacle. Secondly, he blamed inadequate contact tracing standards. And thirdly, he said that the Black Lives Matter protest had sent the wrong message and was a double standard. Here he is.
Well, we do know that there was a very significant breach with catastrophic outcomes in the hotel quarantine. And in addition to that, obviously, contact tracing, we're working with the Victorians to make sure that they achieve that standard that's absolutely fundamental of every case, every day being followed up. And finally, of course, Victorians, Australians generally have done an amazing job at keeping their distance, but after the protests in Victoria, clearly there were some who saw a double standard and felt that if it was okay for 10,000, it's okay for 10, but it was never okay for 10,000. So they're the things that have happened in Victoria.
Daniel Andrews chose to hire cheap security guards, given he knocked back help from the ADF when you offered it, given his contract tracing effort has not been up to scratch. Was it right for him to partly blame Victorians for this second outbreak, which he did at a press conference during the week?
Well, my approach has been to say that I think Victorians deserve all praise for an extraordinary job. I do not think that Victorians, as a general rule, have been anything other than vigilant and extraordinary. We do know, following the protests, that there were some who looked at those protests and said, well, if it's okay for them in mass, surely it's okay for us as a family. But it never was.
So it's very clear now what has led to the massive outbreak in Victoria, a state that in early June had virtually no daily cases. Victorians who are losing loved ones, losing their business, their way of life, suffering from mental illness or from COVID-19 are owed a genuine and detailed explanation from this government about what has gone wrong.